Hi, I'm Sherry Dubois. I'd like to read The Turtle, the Crab, and the Mermaid. It was a fun short story. The Turtle, the Crab, and the Mermaid each took a seat near sea level view. They needed to collect one more tangible for today's dockside picnic. The three were always a daring group. There were days even mermaids sat freely above water, as brave as they all were, all of the time. It was difficult to enjoy a day with sun on your back until one day it was easier to enjoy sun on your back. Welcome the Merkid was determined to know why. Feeling sun near a shoreline is one most certain way for merfolk to stay attentively alert. Immense dangers reside in forgetting to manage breaking surface water parts. One must never break water within view range of a land coast. Through this determined focus on personal safety, the trio pod has inspired thoughtfully organized cosmic adventures for generations now. The trio pod worked with discipline and unerring discernment in situations when one simply could not know what to do. Together, through unbreakable bonds, the trio pod led memorable excursions over millions of light years for almost 7 years. This trio pod bravely sacrificed their own comforts during immense levels of dedication to exploration never before witnessed anywhere. Always diligent and always aware of the feel of the sun in unfamiliar places, this rambunctious trio carries many a story to entertain, stories which also must never be forgotten. On one third day of June, peculiar events from an unexpected visitor made a lasting impression. Events we revisit for you here in great detail. These events will never be forgotten. The sun came a bit earlier on that one day, but still, Crab didn't anticipate any need for urgency on this rise. Once the rivers rose, the forge supplied abundance, with fun games at varying levels and degrees of interest. Second to no friendship, Crab decided to rap gently on Turtle's shell. Living not much over a shuffle from one another, care up to neighboring lands was coordinated by all. Almost a year into their neighboring, Turtle and Crab found Mermaid, sunning along a rocky shoreline while she slept soundly. "Good day to you, Mermaid," Crab and Turtle said loudly to all. Everyone waved about. Mermaid excused herself from sunning company, splashing merrily to distract the movement of her pod exiting the immediate area. Her pod made a rippleless egress, while Welcome began approaching the shortest rock diversion to cover herself on both sides near the dock. Pod waited for her. Pod is a name she lovingly conferred upon her two non-mer friends on a later date, Crab and Turtle. These two became her favorite daytime fun friends, and neither were merfolk. Even though merfolk were really her pod, Welcome decided the turtle and the crab were her pod. The two liked her term fine, but they didn't hear her capitalize their P. Each time Welcome said it, she bestowed great privilege onto them both. Even though the two couldn't respond to an obvious show of respect by privilege, Welcome knew they ably demonstrated appropriate gratitude through the best food collections. These two were obviously the best at almost everything. Pod even found food collections on their land. Welcome chuckled, thinking how she passed her learned knowledge onto Pod in hopes they would let her splash in the dirt one day, all to have a great laugh. This merkid's dream was to splash landscapes with her tail from above the sea. She would have her day in sun and dirt. She was also happy to try land splashing in the moonlight. Moonlight may be the best time to try it. Drivers tend to be sun people, and Welcome was comfortable with sun and moon. She said once that moonlight provides pretty blue rays. Turtle and Crab thought Mermaid was lazy. In order to minimize taxing her energy, they often brought land food treats to the rocks. One day, to never be forgotten, 3 joyous friends shared an elaborate feast on that one boat dock. Appreciatively afterward, praising the rise in waters, their song waves rose buoyantly over the surfaces. Song, voice, these were no threat. Every day the 3 had sounds of activity around them. Boats, even gentle oars, were common to hear. As skies grew brighter, they knew that Mermaid knew. This was the sign of a time when greater challenges arise with sun. This was the time to be unseen by drivers. Regardless of vehicular design, Welcome knew these folks as drivers. Drivers appeared aggressive or harmly, more than they appeared curious or friendly. Turtle looked like a rock while Crab cleaned up. The mermaid splashed about the fishing line while waving heartily at Crab. Even the thought of this fishing pole made Mermaid laugh out loud, then smile. It was the greatest gift she had not ever thought to think of or imagine in any way. It didn't take long after meeting Mermaid for Crab to put together the reason behind a systemic splashing he noticed upon Mermaid's greetings and departures. Welcome was unable to understand Crab and Turtle for quite a while after first introductions. Crab noticed her splashes were an imitation of common activities throughout the day on the rock docks. There was no direct connection to what Crab witnessed, but he followed a hunch that impressed him. He noticed Mermaid drew attention to some fishing lines while avoiding others. He finally reckoned that Mermaid connected fishpole splashes with driver consolidation. Where she splashed, her pod would not be. Between and around the places where there were a quiet fishpole, the pod may be. Drivers often gathered enthusiastically around fishpole lines where the water side was loud with splashes. It was a clever instinct, he thought, if that was instinct. The glory of Mermaid's fishpole antics was different from a clever instinct. She saw a pattern of behavior and exerted her own behaviors in an attempt to make drivers' behaviors more consistent. She did not appreciate when drivers schooled in big numbers. Somehow, being familiar with the way she exerts behavior to disperse schooling behavior in drivers, she had a vision that Crab, too, had exerted thoughts after taking an interest in her way about the fishpole. Welcome didn't recognize a direct relationship, one thought to another here, because all these thoughts weren't hers. Still, something impressed her that this behavior is different than imitation. Even if it is only a clever imitation, something beyond imitation had happened. Welcome was certain. Crab had made her consider how simple a task it is to offer one's unique perspective and to acknowledge a new newness that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable, but is okay if it doesn't hurt. Welcome enjoyed learning. It wasn't often that she was aware of unfamiliarities. When something became newly familiar, she certainly recognized it as the newness of a new familiarity becoming less new and more familiar. Until she thought about her behaviors, she had considered tail splashing to be an act of protecting her friends while they returned to their sea. She had no idea why, and she had not considered that attracting drivers with splashes brought them descending upon her directly. Learning finally that her learning behaviors were endangering herself, she noticed drivers were purposefully quiet around quiet fishpoles. Welcome adjusted a few new behaviors in a few new ways again. It got to be a challenge, but she got the results she wanted in order to avoid driver aggression. and she remembered to remember her safety too. Soon, Welcome was able to learn again. Again, the fish poles had her thinking new ways. When she noticed the erect fishing pole each time the trio pod docked together, she began to learn how to learn these and more new thoughts. Here's the best part. She kept approaching each dock with more confidence. As at each dock there would now be found a quiet fish pole. Eventually, this simple act built a common language of safety between the friends. Welcome didn't know how they were keeping fish poles quiet. Still, quiet fish poles had quickly become an asset for her comfort level. She joked it was her visual breakfast. The three laughed. Laughing even harder, they silently, all three, thought about the many times their bell line was stolen or winded out. Crab eventually had to confess that he replaced each one timely. With a big smile on his face at that time, too, he remembered all those sore muscles. Walking the dock casually was no problem. Finding a missing fishing pole or otherwise replacing the lost was no job for any crab any day, he said. Typically, a few times per week, the trio met for greater adventures. Often they met only for short greetings. No other day could any remember but this one day. That one day they spent 2 times to trio. They didn't talk about this so much and decided we should write it out, lest we forget that day's lessons we do not want to forget, to remember. It was the day past their 19th dock with a fish pole. It had already been replaced by then, too. Crab was tired, but they were already making laughs at the amazement of having fish pole bells. It happened too hard to remember all that was going on. Turtle was tossed like Crab had not witnessed of anyone ever. Crab barely saw the toss, while falling quickly over the cornered edge to the security of surrounding boulders. Mermaid made light of the memory, telling Crab they aren't boulder rocks. Turtle always thinks this is funny. Sometimes Turtle wonders if boulder rocks might be safer cover, the way Mermaid describes them. Welcome didn't see the toss or the corner scale. She didn't see Turtle, and she didn't see Crab. She was grateful they were not around the boulder rocks she crawled over after wiping smaller rocks off her imprinted face. Smaller rocks on the floor of her location gave way to her face as it smashed them whoosh, swoosh down and out in a swift move. This part Welcome remembers clearly. These rocks gave way better than boulder rocks would be able to, in her opinion. Boulder rocks didn't jump or move aside like anything, usually, not like a fish or spear. Not the way smaller rocks give way to the force of water before an object, like her face, meets these rocks on the way down, gratefully. In the mermaid's watch or hearing, boulder rocks were unacceptable for landing. But softly, only in emergencies or very quiet waters. That day she was shocked, but received no scratches and no bruises. She wondered how hard that water had been moving. In her water, deep with her family, the forces hold minimal impact on any of her activities. After seeking deep water shelter again, Mermaid and a few friends attentively approached the dock at the best point for sun as her shadows moved a bit further along. It was still on Welcome's horizon. They were fine to dive where they were, but would need to get closer for their friends and join the harvest. Often, gratefully often, friends would join the fun stories and a bite of their own to share. Sometimes there simply wasn't enough to share, and stoppers were told to move along. This might be where the story began. Or it was the wave. After retelling over a few generations, the stage settings starts in different places and times too, but the details are always correct, with the creative ending to be expected. Whether it was the stoppers moving on or the wave that one very specific day, varies. Water dwellers focus heavily on what and how to learn from what happened versus prioritizing the who and when of anything worth remembering. The whos and the whens are all captured for recording, copied, and amply located throughout the marine world. This stuff too easily forgotten on purpose, such as the short-term agenda to the long-term outcome, those are stories worthy to be repeated. What happens often centers on the who's involved, the personalities, and the obligations. What happens often, swivel on the whens involved, social pretext and social engagements. What happens cannot be captured in a logbook of events. What happens cannot be forgotten. And this is where the family tradition of merfolk storytelling soars to new heights. After decades of laughing at little Welcome's antics, truly no one, including Welcome, remembered what happened that day. The day she originally story-told with such enthusiasm became lifelong storytelling for family and for Pod, whom she will never forget. However, that one day wrapped up with Pod, however that one interaction resolved itself in Welcome's own words, she often laughed with, "It ended like all the others, a great story to tell." Welcome lived a long, event-filled life. Her merfin kin were the best at knowing and doing everything. Her Pod were best at everything. This is enough to rest an old happy body, eventually. For now, the stories continue. The narratives are flavorful. The fun remains fluid. The details remain perfect in all manners remembered to be incorporated by the teller, with each and every telling. Even with the many made-up versions at the end of that one story about that very specific day, Welcome was also remembered to have chuckled often, over many years, encouraging storyteller talents and saying lightly, not too far off, that one. I'll give a little interjection here, and then I'm going to read the last page of the book. It's an introduction to you, for you, to be creative, to write your own stories, to enjoy Welcome, who is painted here, and painted here. There's also a series coming out. Now, I did these paintings, and I'm not an artist, and I'm not a professional reader, but in the next storybooks, based on the merfolk and the merkin, my daughter is the illustrator. My daughter, Cael. I'm so excited. She's the illustrator for the next 5 books. They'll be coming out this year. So here's our wrap-up. Do you have a story ending to tell for fun? Share a new adventure or a final chapter about how Welcome and the Pod wrap up that one day at the dock. Are you familiar with topographical maps? Welcome's great-great-granddaughter, Venus, is painted here. It's Venus. Venus is highly intrigued by the success of topographical mapping systems. Terrafolk and merfolk share a common cursive writing style. There are many similarities with family and education styles too. Within mervilles or daily ocean stream hopping, merfolk also engage in learning sciences, math, faith, topographical maps, and sky reading, such as stars, moon, and sun. Thank you for joining the Family Merci Settlers Stories for the North American West Coast foundings. From our family to yours, welcome. The whole series gets into the fun last names, the surnames, the Mercy as in Mer, yes, but it also sounds like Merci, or it looks like Merci. and the family become mer settlers. As you can tell, Welcome traveled millions of years with her friends over about a 7-year time frame. Have fun with your stories. Creativity is not for perfection. It's for having fun. Up here is a picture puzzle from my daughter as well. Very exciting. I love it. I love it all. Thank you very much for joining me with this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Good night.